Thank you, Kayla. Go ahead if you are ready.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So yes, I'm Kayla. I work with the International Rescue Committee, the IRC, to provide immigration and outreach information sessions in the community. We want to start by explaining that today the information contained in the presentation should not be considered legal advice. Everything that is in the presentation is educational and general and meant to give you an idea of your rights and immigration options, but any sort of specific advice to your case would need to be with a legal representative, either with IRC or an attorney or another nonprofit. We'll give resources for that as well. So we will be talking first about what your rights are in the US and also about DACA status. So we'll explain what that is. And avoiding some immigration scams. We want to talk a little more in depth about that, as well as touch on naturalization, the process of applying for US citizenship, and then we'll leave an opportunity for questions. Just going to shut my door here, one moment. So the IRC, who are we? We are a nonprofit, the International Rescue Committee, founded in 1933 at the request of Albert Einstein, who was himself a refugee coming from World War II. Nowadays, the organization works in over 40 countries and 23 US cities. We are recognized by the US Department of Justice to be able to provide immigration and naturalization legal services. But to be clear, we are not a government agency. We do work strictly on behalf of the clients that we represent. Now, the IRC, we have a lot of different types of applications that we can assist with. We can help with naturalization, citizenship, adjustments of status, DACA renewals, family petitions, employment authorizations, travel documents, lots of things that I haven't actually listed here. We just want to call these out so that if you did need help with any of topics that we don't touch on today, know that we might be able to help you with another type of application. Now, going into your rights and responsibilities. Everybody who is present in the US, no matter what their immigration status is, has certain rights. And we'll go more in depth into some of these rights later in regards to immigration status, but just to quickly touch on, everyone has the right to their freedom of speech, to say what they like, the freedom of religion, practice the religion that they prefer, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, and the right to due process. So again, we'll talk a bit more in depth about what those are and what those mean in terms of immigration and immigration statuses a bit later on. In addition to having rights in the US, everyone, including non-citizens, do have responsibilities to follow the laws of the US. And it's our responsibility to know what those laws are, because even if we don't know what the laws are, you could still be charged with, potentially not following them. So it's important to learn the rules, laws of where you're living so that you can follow and respect those laws as well. You want to also, of course, respect the rights and beliefs of others. Respect that they have those rights I've listed earlier. Everyone in the US is also required to pay taxes as required, or as they are required to do so, and to file an income tax return, again, if required to do so. Males who live in the US between the ages of 18 and 25, again, no matter what the immigration status is, provided that they live here, not as a temporary worker, but live here, sort of permanently, either unlawfully or lawfully as a permanent resident, must register for the selective service. So this is the, military service in the US. It doesn't mean that you would be required to serve in the military, but it is a registration system for selective service for potential military service should that need arise. Non-citizens are also required to report their change of address in the US. So anytime that a non-citizen moves to a new house, they need to file a change of address form, the AR11 online, and we've linked to that within 10 days of moving. So that's kind of another thing on the checklist to keep in mind. Even if you update your driver's license with your new address, that doesn't replicate into the immigration system, and that needs to be done separately to alert the immigration system that you have moved. In addition, we also want to make some warnings, some things to keep in mind for non-citizens. Non-citizens should not vote or register to vote in the US. They should not serve on a jury and need to be careful about traveling outside of the US for long periods of time, although there are exceptions. So that's just kind of a general rule, that's 6 months or more. If you're a lawful permanent resident, of course, what they want to see is that lawful permanent residents live here, their life is here, and they don't spend half the year somewhere else outside of the US. So that's where they're looking at, a flag of if someone's traveled for 6 months or more where they did not return to the US at all during that period of 6 months. So it's a single chunk of 6 months travel. And of course, criminal convictions can affect immigration status, even for minor offenses where it's not clear that that would be such a huge impact on immigration status, can cause an issue. And so if you're concerned or you have anything in your background that you're not sure about, do talk with an immigration expert. Again, I'll link to our booking website, but you can absolutely contact other nonprofit organizations that provide legal immigration services, or attorneys, though of course you'll want to ask them for their fee schedule to know what their fees may be in advance. Now, I said we would jump a little bit more in depth into your rights, and so we're going to kind of shift into that now. I mentioned earlier, everyone in the US has certain rights, no matter what their immigration status is in the US. And we're going to specifically talk in terms of contact with ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So let's think about what those rights are and who needs to be most aware of these rights. So everybody has them and everyone should be aware of what their rights are, but some people are at a particularly heightened risk of contact with ICE. So being arrested by ICE or being detained by ICE or being questioned by ICE. So people who are here without lawful immigration status, but also people who do have status in the US, but have certain criminal convictions, are definitely at a heightened risk of arrest or negative contact with ICE and should be most keenly aware of these rights. But again, everyone has these rights and should be aware of them, just in cases where you have contact with ICE that's unexpected, or ICE does sometimes conduct what's known as ICE raids, where they just kind of sweep an entire location, employment location, or neighborhood. And so this does happen. And in those circumstances, it would of course be very important to know what your rights are in that case. Now, if you were to be approached by an ICE agent, an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent, you have the right to remain silent. You can refuse to answer ICE agents' questions, and you would do this simply by saying, I want to remain silent. You, in those circumstances, do want to remain calm and not run from them, because that can only escalate the situation. Remember that you have this right to silence to protect you, no matter what they say. Even if they say you have to answer our questions, you do not. You have this right to silence guaranteed to you by the Constitution, the highest law of the land in the US. If you feel uncertain about saying this or enacting any of the rights that we'll talk about, they have red cards, which are available to be printed out online. So I've got links here. You can print and carry a red card. This will be sent out to you. The presentation will be sent out to you after, so you can click these links. On the red card, it says exactly this right, that you want to remain silent, you do not wish to answer questions. It talks about other rights in terms of an ICE agent entering your home, and that you would like to have an attorney. This card can just be handed directly to the ICE agent, and is something that can enact your rights in replace of you having to say that. Now, it's possible that an ICE agent may ask for you to show your immigration documents. If you have valid legal immigration documents, you can show those if you're asked, but it's very important not to provide false documents. So for instance, if you have a green card, it's valid, and they're asking for you to show proof of your immigration status, it might be a good option to show them your green card, and that could resolve it. But if you don't have those documents, you don't have proof of that, and they're asking for that, or you have any false documents, again, don't provide those documents to them. Now, ICE, if they were to come to your home, they're knocking on your door, you also have rights when you're in your home. ICE cannot search your home without a warrant, and you don't need to open the door to your house without seeing that warrant. So there's a couple of things you'll want to do. You would want to ask the officer first if they have a warrant. If they say they do, you want to ask them to slip it under the door, hold it up to the window, because you want to inspect it. It's not enough that they say they have a warrant. You want to make sure that it is actually signed by a judge. And depending on the type of warrant that it is, there's either a search warrant or an arrest warrant. If it's a search warrant, it needs to have your exact address on it. If it does not have your exact address on it, you do not have to open the door. And if it's an arrest warrant, make sure that it's for someone who lives at your address. And if it's not, you don't have to open the door. And again, of course, if it's not signed by a judge, it's not valid. Unfortunately, we do hear of cases where ICE will show an unsigned warrant, and they're attempting to use that to get someone to open the door and let them into their home. And so unfortunately, people do need to be very vigilant to check and see if if it is signed by a judge and if it has the correct information on it as well. Now, if you were to be detained or arrested by ICE or even by the police, you do have the right to an attorney. You have the right to speak to and request a lawyer or an attorney, though it is a bit different between police or ICE. If you're arrested by police, you can request a government lawyer. This is a lawyer paid for by the US government, provided to you at no cost. But if you're arrested by ICE, they are actually not required to provide a lawyer to you. However, you can request a resource list of attorneys that you can contact in order to have representation. But really, you don't want to rely on them to provide you that resource list if you're arrested by them, if you're in their custody. And so it's better to have the name and number of an immigration attorney memorized that you trust. This should be an attorney who has the ability to represent you in court and in more complex, proceedings. So you would want to have that name and number memorized for yourself if you were to be arrested or detained. And so because you have this right to not say anything or sign anything before speaking with an attorney, it's very important to not lie. Remember that you don't have to provide that information, and lying can only hurt you in the future. So you don't need to share information about where you're born, what your immigration status is, what your criminal record is, none of it. So if you're feeling uncertain and you feel like they're asking you, do you have a criminal background? And you want to say no, when in fact you do. It's better to say nothing at all and ask to speak with a lawyer or an attorney and enact that right to silence than to lie. So these two phrases, I want to remain silent and I want to talk to a lawyer, are the phrases that can protect you most. And if you say those two things, I should stop questioning you after that. Now, avoiding immigration scams, because unfortunately we know this is true as well, not just on, leaving aside ICE and government involvement. There are, of course, private individuals, private companies which do scam people, and we want you to be aware of what that may look like so that you can avoid that. In the US, notaries and notary publics are not attorneys and cannot give legal advice. Unfortunately, in other countries, it is possible for notaries to provide legal advice, and those same individuals or other individuals will use that information to take advantage of people in the US who don't know that in the US, notaries and notary publics cannot provide legal advice. So avoid notarios. These are individuals who may attempt to provide immigration legal services where they are not authorized to do so. They may give bad advice. They might not file paperwork at all. They may charge fees for things. And often we see that they're giving information that seems too good to be true. If it seems like it is too good to be true, listen to that instinct, get a second opinion, and always trust your gut. Only attorneys and accredited representatives can answer immigration legal questions in the US. Lawyers have to have a license to practice law in the US, and you can ask to see their law license. Accredited representatives need to be accredited and work for an agency that's recognized by the Board of Immigration Appeals, the Department of Justice. So that's what the IRC falls under. We are an organization, an agency recognized by the Board of Immigration Appeals. We have both attorneys and accredited representatives who work under us, and you can ask to see the accreditation documents or law license of anyone that you would work with at the IRC. Never sign an application for immigration that has any kind of false information, no matter what someone may tell you. You need to provide true and correct information on all immigration applications. Never sign a blank form. So just signing and then someone else is going to fill it in for you. You need to know what's written on a form before you sign it. And you should ask for copies of everything that you sign. And if, again, you're unsure about anything that's happening in an immigration proceeding, get a second opinion, especially where the advice sounds too good to be true. And I have linked here 2 immigration consultations for the IRC. Of course, there are many other nonprofits that also provide immigration consultations. The most important thing is that you get good information from recognized and authorized individuals and not from people who are not allowed to practice law in the US. Now, as an additional kind of practical step, and just to call out, in Santa Clara County, there are a lot of resources available from the county if you are struggling with anything regarding housing, baby essentials, food assistance, health insurance, mental health and homelessness, and more. And this does not just apply to citizens, this applies to everyone living in the county who is eligible for these programs. So if you want more information on that, Santa Clara County has a resource guide specifically for immigrants living in the county, and also a housing assistance and basic needs support document as well. So again, this will be sent out to you. You can click these links to get more information about options in the county. So just quickly here, if you can type yes or no in the chat, it'd be really helpful to me to understand if you have a little bit more knowledge about your rights in the US following this presentation. Then we'll move on to talking about DACA, naturalization, and then dive into your questions as well. I'll just pause here for that before we move forward. Great, thanks. So moving into talking about DACA and what this program is. First of all, DACA is an acronym for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival program. This program is a discretionary federal policy that was enacted by the Obama administration back in 2012. It offers temporary protection from deportation and an employment authorization for eligible individuals for 2 years. So people who don't currently have any kind of immigration status would, if they are eligible, be offered that temporary protection and employment authorization. It grants access to a driver's license and helps to stop the accrual of any unlawful presence when it's granted, when deferred action is granted. But problematically, it doesn't confer any legal status upon individuals. It doesn't give them any kind of permanent residency in the US and doesn't offer a path to permanent residency or citizenship. So this is strictly for individuals who arrived here as children before the date that this federal policy was announced. So someone who was under the age of 31 back in August 15th, 2012, and can show that they arrived here as children and have resided here and meet many other qualifications to qualify for this protection from deportation and employment authorization, where again, no other options exist for their immigration status. So they're here unlawfully, and this is a program to essentially provide some limited protection. There's been a lot of back and forth with the DACA program, and we want to state that it is still currently as of today in effect, but there are ongoing legal challenges to the program. The future is uncertain with the program, and so that's kind of the biggest takeaway. If someone has existing DACA status, their immigration status is DACA, they need to be aware of any future changes and to keep asking questions, keep an eye out for any news or updates to the program, as again, it is uncertain what the future holds, but as of today, current recipients of DACA can submit for renewals of their DACA status. So it's still in effect and that people can continue to renew, but no initial DACA applications are being allowed. So anyone who doesn't currently have DACA, even if they would have otherwise qualified for this program, is not being accepted. So no new / initial DACA applications are being allowed. However, again, people can submit to renew their DACA status if they've ever held that before. And also people who traveled on advanced parole through DACA should consider returning to the US as soon as possible, because if the program is terminated, if there's any changes to the program, that could cause an issue for re-entering the country, as it's very, very, very difficult for DACA recipients to travel outside the country, and they have to have this advanced parole permission to do so. And if the program were to change or to terminate, that could be very challenging to return / not possible. And so we want to make aware anyone traveling with advanced parole permission through the DACA program should consider, getting legal advice and returning where that's possible. Now, for renewing the DACA, ideally individuals who have current DACA status should submit their renewal between 120 and 150 days prior to the expiration date of their current DACA. And it's very important to keep that in mind, because if the renewal is submitted too late, or there's a gap in between where someone has let their DACA expire, that can, cause difficulties for their application, and of course would lead to a lapse in their authorization for employment. And this is a good reminder for everyone, regardless of their immigration status, but to keep a copy of your employment authorization document, keep a copy of your immigration documents, both the back and the front, keep a copy of your Social Security card if you have one, your ID, just to make sure that you have all of these copies, and keep the DACA card in a safe place so that you can avoid having to pay a fee again to replace any documents. This is again also true for any lawful permanent resident or DACA employment authorization work permit holder. If you lose the card, it doesn't mean that you're losing your status, but it does mean that you're going to need to, replace those cards, replace the permanent resident card, replace the work permit card, whatever it is, and probably be paying the fee again. So important to, yes, keep all documents safe and be mindful of where they are. For DACA recipients, the employment authorization document can be used as an ID, but it's not the same thing as a passport or a social security card. So just be mindful of that. It is a form of identification, but isn't something that would allow, travel such as a passport. Now, moving into naturalization. This is we'll start from the basics. What is it? Naturalization is the process that a lawful permanent resident, also known as a green card holder, goes through in order to obtain their certificate of naturalization, which confirms them as a U.S. citizen. So for many people in the U.S., this is kind of the culmination of their immigration journey. There are, of course, eligibility requirements to apply for naturalization. Everyone who wants to submit for naturalization needs to be a lawful permanent resident for at least 5 years or 3 years if that person is married to a U.S. citizen and qualifies to apply under that 3 years rule. They also know that the applications for naturalization are taking quite a long time, and those are not going to get approved in just a couple of months. So they allow applicants to apply 3 months early. So at 4 years and 9 months of lawful permanent residency, individuals can submit for their application for naturalization, again, provided that they meet all the other requirements. Or if someone is applying under the marriage to a U.S. citizen rule, so the 3 years rule, they can submit at 2 years and 9 months of lawful permanent residency, again, provided that they meet all the other requirements. So if applying under the marriage to a U.S. citizen, they need to be aware that their spouse needs to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 3 years. They need to be married for at least 3 years, living together for at least 3 years, even if they're applying at that 2 years and 9 months rule. So applying 3 months early, those other requirements need to be met. Individuals need to be at least 18 years old and speak, read, and write basic English, though there are exceptions. If someone is 50 years old or older and they've had the green card for at least 20 years, they do not need to take the English exam, and they can actually bring an interpreter with them to their interview. And the same thing is true if an applicant is 55 years old or older and they've had the green card for at least 15 years. They do not need to take the English exam and can bring an interpreter to their interview. Both those things need to apply. You can't just be over 50 or over 55. You have to be over 50 and have had the green card for that 20 years, or in the case of the 55-15 rule, you need to be 55 or older and have had that green card for at least 15 years to qualify for the automatic English exception. If someone does not qualify for the automatic English exception, know that they're not looking for absolutely completely perfect English, but they do want to see that you understand the information that's been written in the form and can communicate, basically about that. We'll talk a bit more about what happens at the interview and another slide. Everyone who wants to apply also needs to pass the U.S. History and Government exam. That happens during the interview. Even if the person receives an English exception, they would still need to take the U.S. History and Government exam, although that would be through an interpreter in their preferred language. If someone is 65 years old or older and they've had the green card for at least 20 years, they not only get the English exception, they also get the easier version of the civics exam. So there's less questions to study and they're considered more straightforward. Applicants also need to maintain their continuous U.S. residency. So what we're talking about during this is anyone who we mentioned earlier has traveled for 6 months or more where they did not return at all to the U.S. during that time. We at the IRC would flag that. We would think of that as a red flag for continuous U.S. residency, so a quotes long travel. We would need to take a bit of a closer look at that case. We're not saying here that applicant would or wouldn't be eligible if they've had this long trip. We just need to take a little bit closer look at their case and consider all the circumstances and think of any, risks that might be involved in that. Applicants also need to live in the state where they're applying for citizenship for at least 3 months and show that they've been physically present in the U.S. for at least half of the last 5 years. This is a bit different than taking long trips, and I would very rarely see an issue with someone having spent too much time outside the US where they did not also have long trips. But it's possible, especially where someone lives close to the border to Mexico or Canada, and they maybe cross back over that border a lot. For this, again, we're just adding up the travels in the last 5 years to see if they've spent at least half of the last 5 years in the US physically. Applicants also need to be willing to take an oath of allegiance and demonstrate good moral character. And so that's a really broad eligibility requirement. What constitutes good moral character? First of all, it's a higher standard than sort of just don't be bad. It's holding someone to a higher standard, showing that you're of good moral character in the US. What they're in practical terms looking for, we're looking at all criminal background, all immigration history, all tax problems. When we are doing screenings for this and when we're helping with naturalization applications, we are looking at the total history, not just the history in the last 5 years, not just when the person lived in the US, not just when they were over 18. We're looking at any time ever in any country ever. Are there background issues that we need to be aware of? Because that's what immigration is going to look at. Naturalization is the last time that immigration has the chance to review an applicant. Once someone is a citizen, they're a citizen for life. It's theirs and it can't be taken away. And so they're very, very careful about looking at all of this person's total history and also holding to that higher standard. Now, that said, if you are thinking, oh, there's this thing in my background, I guess I shouldn't apply, get a legal screening, get legal advice. Sometimes people think that some issue in their background is going to cause them a problem and prevent them from being able to apply for citizenship, and that's totally not the case, and they actually are eligible. And then sometimes we find people think like, oh, well, this thing won't cause me any issues. It was so long ago. And actually it can. And so we've seen both, and it's very important just to, if there's anything coming into your mind right now, again, I'm not a legal representative. I can't provide you that legal advice. And it would be very specific to your case and often involves quite a lot of paperwork. We still want to encourage you to look at that, to get the legal advice, find out if you can apply for citizenship, because there are, of course, many benefits to doing so, despite all of these eligibility requirements, and I'll kind of segue into that. So, as I mentioned, once someone is a US citizen in the US, they are always a citizen. Once they naturalize, that citizenship is theirs for life. And citizens have the benefit of being able to, move around wherever they like. Doesn't matter how long they want to leave the US for, they can leave the US and have the peace of mind of knowing that they can always come back, whether that's, 2 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. It doesn't matter. Once you're a citizen, you can leave the US and know that you can come back and live here whenever you like. You're always a citizen. That's not something that can be taken away from you by spending too much time away from the US. Citizens also have the right to vote and have their voice heard in our government, vote for the people that they want to represent them in our government, vote for the rules and laws that they want in the US. And they're also able to travel with a US passport, which of course can make coming in and out of the US simpler, and petition for more relatives. So green card holders can petition only for their spouse and their unmarried children. Citizens can petition for their spouse, their children who are married or unmarried, their siblings, and their parents. So the categories of people that you can petition to come live here, to sponsor to come live in the US, open up dramatically when you become a citizen. And also, if you have children who are under the age of 18 and live with you in your legal and physical custody, they automatically get their citizenship through their naturalized parent when that parent naturalizes. They don't need to apply for the N-400. They don't need to submit paperwork, pass the test, none of that. They automatically become citizens through their parents. There's also the peace of mind that citizens cannot be deported from the US. Citizens always have the right to live here no matter what changes may happen in immigration law. Job opportunities expand. Some federal jobs are limited to US citizens. And so that is also a big advantage as well. There are some federal grants and scholarships for school that become available, and other kind of sundry details here, like you're not required to report a change of address as a US citizen. So there's no need to submit when you move in AR-11 or anything like that. So what happens at the interview for naturalization? There's obviously steps before this. You have to apply and pay a fee and make sure that you're eligible and do all of that. But a lot of people want to know what's going to happen at the interview. At the interview, the officer is going to review the N-400, the paperwork that you submit for naturalization. That can be submitted nowadays online or through paper forms. I'll just note as well that for the N-400, they do still offer fee waivers. So for people who are applying, it's possible to submit a fee waiver with your N-400 application. The fee right now is $725. But people who have Medi-Cal or other means tested benefits typically qualify to request a fee waiver and would pay $0 if that fee waiver is approved. So just as a side note. Now at the interview, the officer is going to ask questions from that N-400, and there's a lot of information written in there. During that same time, they're conducting an informal speaking test to see if that person is able to, communicate in English and understand questions. But I'll note that it's possible to, request someone to repeat the question, slow down. That's perfectly fine if it's just that they're talking too quickly or you need something explained a bit more. Then there's sort of the formal test part of the interview. There's a reading test where an applicant needs to correctly read one of 3 sentences in English. They provide the vocabulary list online that can be accessed. I'll link it on the next slide. And so it's just a matter of studying in advance for that. There is also a writing test where an applicant needs to correctly write one of 3 sentences in English. Again, that's from a vocabulary list that they provide in advance online. And lastly, there is that U.S. history and government exam. There's 100 possible questions, and that can seem kind of daunting, but they do give all of the questions and answers online. So it's just a matter of studying. And at the interview, they don't ask all 100 questions. They just pull 10 at random, and the applicant needs to get at least 6 of those 10 questions correct. If you were to submit your application for naturalization now, you would be taking the 2008 version of the civics test. There have been some changes and they are proposing to make changes, but currently right now people are taking the 2008 version of the civics test. And so you can study for those or look at the questions online here, both in English and in other languages as well. Now, after the interview, USCIS can either grant, deny, or continue the application. If it's granted, that's the best outcome. The person would return their green card and receive their certificate of naturalization, confirming them as a US citizen. If the application is denied, the applicant will receive notice explaining why it was denied, and there are even some options to request a hearing, petition for a new review of the application, or even potentially apply again. But where someone has been denied, we would definitely encourage them to get legal advice prior to making any further decisions. If the case is continued, this typically means that it's on hold. The applicant is often being asked to return for a second interview, usually because they haven't passed one of the civics exams or the reading or writing exams, and they're being given a chance to come back and try those formal tests again within a 90-day period. It's also possible they might want to see additional documents, and basically whatever they would need to make a decision in the case, they would provide that information to the applicant in a written form. IRC does hold free citizenship workshops. We hold these almost on a weekly basis. They're virtual, so there's no need to come into our offices to complete that. It can be done one-on-one with an IRC accredited representative who can help to complete the N400, the fee waiver, and it's very easy to sign up. You can sign up using this link here and book a time that works for you. And again, I'll link our booking site here. You can start a case with us for, of course, for citizenship, but also for consultations where you have questions for other types of applications. You can book an appointment with us for a consultation or give us a call or a text if you're not able to use our booking system, and we can help you to do that. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions that I could potentially answer for anyone. I'll also just check the chat or the Q&A.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording and then we can move to Q&A session. Is that okay?
That's wonderful.
Okay.